that you're having, because you're coming from a completely different perspective than our students in the university. Okay, so these are students who are pursuing their degrees in kinesiology. Many are going into physical therapy, occupational therapy, nursing. In terms of the exercise science area, we have those who are going into physical education, the PE. We have athletic trainers, we have the adapted area, we have dance. So all of these areas are wrapped within this comprehensive kinesiology umbrella. But their approach is very different than yours. It's coming from this academic perspective. All of yours is coming from some passion, from something in your lives. And it's interesting because we aren't necessarily connecting with you. And there has to be that connection that has to occur over time. My background at Northridge is over 26 years now. And so my experience in the field has been long. It's been varied in terms of the directions that I've gone. It's always been in response to what's necessary in the community. It goes, I mean, early on it was much more laboratory-based research to identify the things that people have to do to get better. As I moved away from the laboratory, there were a lot of activities related to the infomercial industry, because it was coming out so fast, and yet you would see things on there that you would, I don't know if that works or not, right? Yep. And yet the consumer wasn't able to digest that. I mean, even as I would watch an infomercial, the information would come across so quickly that that doesn't sound right. But then something else, and then you're distracted and you're moving on. And so at one point in time I said, this is something that we have to look at. And I worked with the American Council on Exercise, ACE, because they had a platform where they could get information to AP, they could put it out in their publications, that while the equipment was still being advertised, we could get the research done, get the information out and say, yes, this works, this doesn't work. And so come from a buyer be aware perspective. So it was evident to me that the research that I could do in the laboratory, we could publish that, and very few people would read it. Someone would pick it up every once in a while, but for the most part, it languishes in this obscure journal. And so there was the need then to get information out so that people could use what it is that we were talking about. And that's what that infomercial experience kind of taught me, was that we could use our research abilities, get things done, get the information out, and have an effect with probably a greater population. Tied into that then at one point was then the work with LA City Fire, running their wellness programs for 7 years. And I was still employed at Northridge, and so what I did was I cut my time back a little at Northridge to do the fire department. And that was, all of this had been building up to demonstrate to our students what was possible. That they could take their education and they could apply it. They could apply it in a practical manner. They could apply it in places where there were no opportunities, at least at that point in time. And so with the fire department, I ran through a lot of graduate students doing their research with the fire department to try and identify the things that we needed to do with the fire department. We had our challenges with the fire department. We identified a lot of problems, but we had our challenges because the fire department has a union. And with the union, eventually push comes to shove. I could tell you that you have a problem, and whether you choose to do something about it or not, the union will get involved at some point in time if you choose not to do anything about it. And so at some point, the fire department and we got together and they said, you're giving us a lot of good information, but if we're not going to follow what you're telling us, then it doesn't make sense for us to have you employed anymore. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I think that's a little bit short-sighted, and in the long run, you're going to pay a big price for it. And I think that price is still coming down the line. It's going to come down the line because heart disease is considered presumptive. And the heart disease now is not coming because of the danger of the job. It's coming around because of lifestyle choices. Because the firefighter in many ways represents society, and the changes that Henry was talking about in terms of obesity and all the things related to exercise and the diseases associated, they're coming home to roost, and the fire department or the city has to pay for that because it's associated with heart disease, your arthritis, your coronary artery disease, your diabetes. All of those things now become a lifestyle related choice. And so at some point in time, they're going to have to look at it, because one thing I did before I left was I published my data for them so that they could see what the eventual cost was going to be, particularly as you have an aging department at this point in time. A large portion of the department is hitting their 50s and 60s and entering retirement or having challenges. I think the best thing that the fire department has going for it is that 90% of the calls are EMS calls and not fire related. I think if they were fire related, we would be having a greater series of problems, because the demand, the physical demand, then would start to manifest itself in what it was in terms that they would have to do for performance. So EMS, that doesn't show up, but on an emergency call it would. And so from there then, it was clear then, again, that we could do things. We could do things with the public. And about 10 years ago, I got involved with LA County Department of Public Health. At that point in time, the Network for Healthy California was coming into play. And the desire to get involved with them came from a conversation I had with one of their nutritionists that identified that we are having the Network for Healthy California come in, and we have these physical activity specialist positions. So the Network for Healthy California, there's 13 regions throughout the state. And so they had 13 PA specialists, one for every region. But within that, the educational background, there was no requirement for kinesiology. That didn't quite resonate, that if you have a physical activity specialist, but you have no requirement for any background within movement or exercise, how's this work? And it was apparent from the conversations then that the network didn't know what kinesiology was. All right, and so you have a large entity within public health not knowing who we were. Now, I don't think that's their problem so much as it's our problem, is that we obviously haven't marketed ourselves. And that therein lies the academic institution in general, in that there's a tendency to stay within the walls, and that if everyone in the university knows who kinesiology is, then everybody else must know. And that's not entirely the case. And particularly since we changed the name, right? Originally it was physical education. People got that, but physical education was one-dimensional in its description of what we could do, so we thought, well, we should change the name. And so we changed the name to now no one knows what we do. So, that's like a few steps backwards, right?
Yes.
And so that then led us to San Fernando. Part of it is, it's the economy, in the sense of our students were having difficulty driving to downtown LA. We're out in Northridge, not a real far away, but all of a sudden gas started becoming a factor for our students, that they couldn't just get up and go. And so in San Fernando, what we had was a city that was closer. We had a 90% Latino population, and so it fit in terms of this public health crisis, that we could work with the city that we could have an impact with. And what was happening with the Network for Healthy California is that we were developing a lot of tools for them, a lot of resources, statewide resources, a couple that won statewide awards, and actually won a national award, Shape of Yoga, and won an award, and Power Up in 10. So these are two resources that we developed for them, but as much as they won those awards, nobody knew they came from kinesiology, because you're talking about the Network for Healthy California, subcontracted by LA County Department of Public Health. Well, we're pretty far down on the pecking order here, and so who actually produces that is Network for Healthy California. It's not evident where it came from. And so despite the fact that we were making some penetration in public health, it was to the extent of we had positions that were starting to occur, but no one knew where the knowledge was emanating from. So with City of San Fernando, then you had an infrastructure of its own city. You have your mayor, you have your city council. You could get to people and you could talk to them and you could have impact. And so that was the conversation in 2011 was, I would implement the same model for them that I've been implementing for the last 20 years in other institutions, fire department, public health, and that was that we would work on the wellness of their city in whatever area is deemed appropriate, and at the end of a year, or actually at the end of 2 years, I brought in 8 graduate students, and I said that if you think that our being here is justified, then you need to create jobs, you need to create positions. If you create positions, then we'll continue to bring forth the expertise because you value it. For me, what that does is that then that allows me to have someone out in the field who knows what we do. I don't have to be out there. They can tell me we need this, this, and this. I can send them students with that background. They know what to do with them. And so that's the premise behind 100 Citizens as well, is that it's supposed to lead to job creation for our people. And so within the city of San Fernando then, fortuitous as it was, their parks supervisor got fired. And so there was an opening. And it was my suggestion then that, well, this is a position you should fill then with someone with this kinesiology background. And as a function of that, then individual was hired. Now I had a contact after that I could send people to.
I'm sorry. So someone loses a job, and I mean, did you? Who did you speak to? Someone like an elected official?
Yeah, the mayor and city council.
Okay. I mean, did you address them formally?
Informally.
Informally?
Suggested.
And did a little bit of politicking?
And I said, well, and it's an open application process.
Right.
And so they had any number of applications, and I said,
I'm sure they would. I'm sure they'd have their own friends. And,
absolutely.
But they made a decision to follow your direction. It sounds
by that point in
very
time,
bold on their part.
well, I think what we had established was a honest relationship. That what I had given them up to that point, they had paid nothing for. And at that point, it was good things. The extra circuit that you referred to at Northridge, they ended up having some, you know, as cities do, had some money left over. And I suggested that they put in that same type of equipment. It's the same type of equipment you see in the many parks that are put out by the Trust for Public Land, TPL.
And Mar Vista Park has some machines and equipment.
So the fitness zones.
Right.
Trust for Public Land, and we're working with them now as well, because I invited them out to San Fernando and I said, you can put in this equipment at parks, but if people don't know how to use the equipment, then eventually it's not going to be used. Also, typically those installations are maybe 5, 6 pieces of equipment that actually can be used in more than one way if you have the thought process or the education to show people how it could be used. So it has greater utility than it's actually designed to have. And so, you know, Trust for Public Land at this point, they opened up just this last 6 months a Baldwin Park and Rosemead, and same model that we're using in San Fernando. I have students that go out there and they provide workshops for the community as they come into the park of how to use the equipment. And Trust for Public Land likes that. It demonstrates a greater utility of the resources that they're paying for, and so they see value in it. So I think that relationship will continue.
Now was that a grant relationship?
For Trust with Public Land?
Yeah.
For Trust for Public Land, they have the funding they've identified the funding to create those fitness zones. And I said, you know, more than willing to come out. What I'd like you to do is pay our students to come out. I want you to pay their travel, and I want you to pay them this amount per hour for at least the lead students. and then they bring some undergrads to volunteer with them. And so again, part of it, it's always about this job creation, because it's not that we're greedy, but in the end, I am not going to get students to follow this road if it leads to a dead end.
Right.
And they're in school with hopes of finding a career,
Sure.
and if there's no job opportunity, then, you know, why should I go that way? Right. And so with San Fernando, then we had the fitness zone equipment,